You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
From Mamamia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter. Amalia Melis's husband died suddenly in the middle of the night. And what happened next sounds like something from a true crime podcast, but it was in fact her life. First, the police believed that she murdered him, and she had to prove that she didn't. And then 3 years later, she was forced to exhume his body as part of a custom in Greece that all families have to go through because the cemeteries are overcrowded. I first learned about Amalia's story when I read the most extraordinary piece she'd written for the New York Times. It was called My Last Shopping List for Him. And that title referred to the fact that when you have to go and be present for your loved one to be dug up, you're asked to bring certain things. And she talks in this episode about what those things were and what that process was like. Amalia's love story with her husband spanned decades. They had a child together, and after his unexpected death and everything that came afterwards, the story of her life and how she went on is moving and unexpectedly beautiful. Here's Amalia Melis. Amalia, your piece was just so exquisite. Can you tell me how you and Ruli met?
Oh boy. Well, we met in Greece. I was living there on my own and he was working there on his own. But we were from the same neighborhood in Astoria, New York, where most of the Greek immigrants were. And I went to school with his younger sister. So we knew each other, but I didn't know him. And he was 10 years older than I was, so we never ran in the same circles. But we met coincidentally in Athens through a common friend. And we dated in Greece, and then he moved to Switzerland. I moved to New York for my graduate degree. We met up again in New York. Then we moved to Greece, and we decided to get married. And we got married on the island my parents are from, and we got married in the church where my grandmother got married, believe it or not.
Wow. You said that you met Ruli in Greece and you said you were living there by yourself. What were you doing in Greece? Because you're from New York.
I bought a one-way ticket for myself from New York, and I decided I wanted to live in Greece. I wanted to try living there, and I met him there. I went to school with his younger sister in Astoria, and I didn't really know him. I met him through a common friend in Athens, so it was pretty coincidental that we met.
How old were you and how old was he?
I was 23 and he was 33.
And was it hot and heavy from the start? Did you know it was going to be serious?
For me, it was hot and heavy. For him, no. He was a confirmed bachelor and a real international corporate guy who traveled everywhere.
It just worked out.
Yeah, it did. It did. After back and forth, different countries. I moved to New York. He moved to Switzerland. Then we met up in New York again. And after being together for a couple of years, we decided to get married and move to Greece. So we moved to Greece.
And when did you have a child together?
10 years later. I did not want to have children. I wanted to work and I wanted to travel, and he didn't want children either. But after 10 years of being together, we both decided, okay, let's try this.
And it worked.
Yes, we have a daughter who's 27. She lives in London, and she just started her doctorate program, and she's really good at what she's chosen to do, and I'm very proud of her. Her name is Anna.
In the year before Ruli passed away, what was your life together like? Where were you at in your life and in your marriage?
In my marriage, I was very happy. The year he passed away, we would have celebrated our 30-year anniversary of marriage. We were a good couple. We communicated. We had things in common. We were very different personalities, but we complemented each other. And he was someone I respected and looked up to.
You're an artist and he's a businessman. Was that broadly the way things were?
It was a different world. He was a numbers man and I was anything but numbers. If you could draw a line, I would be curly and he would be straight. But we complemented each other and it worked. And it was a great relationship.
If it's not too painful, can you tell me about the night that he passed away?
Well, it's kind of strange. January 4th was a great day. We were in the center of Athens, sunny day, and we met friends for lunch and everything was great. I bought some beads for the artwork that I make. I make assemblage sculptures out of found objects. And, we were hand in hand in Athens. Everything was fine. And then in the evening when we got home, something changed in me. I felt this heavy, heavy feeling in my chest, this darkness. And I didn't think of it, but I used to get these feelings when I was a kid before someone passed away, and it would scare me to death. And so I kind of pushed it away as I was growing up. But anyway, it came back, and I didn't put two and two together. And so I told him, I have this really heavy, dark feeling in my chest, like this great, great sadness, like I've been crying forever and ever. Those are my exact words. And we kind of laughed at it and said, okay, why would you feel this sadness? And we went to bed that way. We just wrote it off as, Amalia, odd thing. And a few hours later, I woke up to a thud, and he had fallen down the stairs we had a maisonette, like a 2-floor house, and we had white marble steps. Somehow he fell down the steps, and I found him with his face down, his arms behind him like he was diving, and his head cracked open in a pool of very thick blood. And so I was absolutely shocked. I didn't hear him scream. I didn't hear him say anything. He didn't call out for help. And that's how I found him. No explanation.
I'm so sorry. That I can't imagine how distressing that must have been. Did he usually get up in the night? Was he well?
He was well. I mean, he had no health problems. He was fine. I went to the coroner to get the death report, and he basically told me he didn't know how he died. It wasn't an aneurysm. It wasn't a stroke. It wasn't a heart attack. But the head was so badly damaged, and I don't know. What if it was an aneurysm? Could they really tell if the head is damaged? I don't know. He couldn't tell me. He thought perhaps he woke up and got up suddenly from bed, and maybe he got dizzy and fainted. But it takes you have to walk from the bed into the hallway, down the stairs. I'm not sure that would apply. So I don't really have an explanation to how he left. And that bothers me to this day.
What did you do?
What did I do? Well, I kept calling his name out, and I felt his back, and he was still warm when I woke up. And then I just called my sister-in-law and my father. Then the police came, and it was such a gruesome scene that I remember a young officer walking into my door, and when he saw what was at the door, he did an about face, and he went outside and vomited. It was bad. It was January 5th, and we usually keep up our Christmas trees with presents there until the day after Epiphany. We usually take trees down. And so there was brain matter everywhere. I mean, it was a scene, I don't know, out of a crime scene.
Out of a horror film.
Yeah, and I was alone at home. I don't know what to say. A nightmare. And then another nightmare started because the public prosecutor was questioning me because I was alone at home, and they wanted to know perhaps I may have pushed him down, or I may have. It just got worse and worse. So I spent a year in hell, basically trying to stand on my feet and deal with Greek bureaucracy and police. And this is really crazy. He had purchased accidental death insurance, and I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't know what it was. So the insurance company would not deal with me for a year until my name was cleared from the public prosecutor's office. And so the police went around our neighborhood asking, what kind of couple were they? Did they fight? It was totally crazy.
Oh my God. Essentially, you had to prove that you didn't murder your husband.
Yes.
While you were dealing with the grief of losing him, the shock of finding him.
Yes.
How do you even process all of those wildly conflicting emotions and situations?
I think now that 7 years have passed, I think I'm out of my stupor, but I think I was a zombie. I just wasn't functioning. And I see it now in retrospect, how much I was not functioning. Like my daughter left the day after the funeral, and she went to school in London. She was a university student at the time. She was 19. And I had to go to the Greek Social Security office so I can fill out forms with my lawyer. And the women behind the desk kept talking about the orphan and the orphan and the orphan. I turned around at some point and asked, what orphan are we talking about? And she said, your daughter, of course. And I started crying. I couldn't understand what they meant. And she said, did your husband die? And I told her yes. And she goes, then your daughter's an orphan. I said, even though I'm alive and standing in front of you? So
wow,
that's what they consider children in Greece whose father dies. So we're still living in a patriarchal society in Greece.
What do you remember of those weeks after he died when the grief was so intense? What did it feel like?
I think all I did was cry. I could not recover at all. I couldn't think of anything. I couldn't eat. I couldn't function. And now that 7 years have passed, I realized that I stopped doing my mammograms. I stopped paying my U.S. taxes. I just stopped. And I was frozen for many, many years. It's scary how frozen I was because I just went through the motions for most things in life.
Who was with you? Who helped you? Who supported you?
Well, I lived alone. I still live in the same house where we lived. I can't seem to unglue myself from it. I had my parents who lived near me, and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, and my daughter, even though she's in London, and my friends. I was lucky to have friends who checked in on me either from the United States or from Greece. They would call me from different parts of Greece. But when you close the door at night, you're essentially alone, and you have to live with the reality of nothing in my life was the same. And I spent a lot of time on Andros, which is the island my family's from. And even socially, I was treated differently. The women, some of the women I met and knew because my daughter was friends with their children, they stopped talking to me. And I couldn't figure out why. But it's pretty common for women to kind of stay away from another woman who's single all of a sudden, whether she's divorced or a widow. And I just kept calling them and asking, do you want to meet for lunch? Do you want to meet for coffee? And they would act totally normal on the phone, but they would never meet me for anything. And I told a very good friend of mine this, and she said, oh, don't you understand? You're single now and you're a threat to their husbands. And I said, excuse me?
Oh, wow.
It's pretty frightening to know how cruel women can be to other women sometimes. And I had to, all the years that have gone by, I kind of maneuvered myself through all this toxic new world I was living in. And I've surrounded myself by women who love me and my friends and my family. And I'm okay right now. I'm standing on my own 2 feet. I am writing. I've written a novel and I'm trying to find an agent for it. I'm just trying to move on. But it's, the grief and the sadness I sometimes feel when I remember what's happened never, ever goes away. It won't go away, no matter what else is in store for me in life.
Does the volume of it get turned down slowly over time, like imperceptibly?
Depending on who I'm with and what I'm doing, I sometimes get lost in the moment or in the relationships I have. But no, I don't think it goes away. No.
During the last 7 years, and particularly in that first year when your grief was at its most acute, what gave you solace? What gave you comfort? Was it doing something? Was it being somewhere?
Well, writing always gives me comfort. I make sense of the world by writing, even if it's in my journal. And making my sculptures really helps because I try to tell stories through the art that I make. And what gave me a little peace was living in the house that my husband built for us in Andros on my grandparents' land. And I spent a lot of time alone. I became a winter swimmer. I swam almost every day in frigid waters, kind of hoping that maybe I would drown and that would be the end of it. I was pretty desperate. I felt terrible. And Greeks or many people say, oh, you have a daughter to live for. You have this to live for. But the truth is it didn't feel strong enough for me to say, oh, yeah, I'll move on. I had to fight to keep on being part of this world. And it was rough. It was very rough.
Up next, I asked Amalia about the day that she had to stand next to her husband's grave while his body was exhumed, and the shopping list that she had for that day and what was on it. Stay with us. You wrote the most extraordinary piece, which is how I found you, called My Last Shopping List for Him. Can you tell me about something that most people wouldn't have any idea about, which is the system in Greece that happens a few years after someone is buried?
Well, it is common to exhume the bones of your loved one 3 years after you bury the person.
Why?
One, there's no space for people to be buried in Greece. The country is very small, and in urban areas at least, and in some islands, I guess, in villages. It's tradition to put the bones in a box and keep it in an ossuary.
What's an ossuary?
A room, a building with boxes lined up, one on top of the other, or at least that's how it is on Andros. Or they build these walls that have room for boxes to be put into them. And also, when COVID hit, I kept paying money to the municipality so I wouldn't have to do it after 3 years, because sometimes the bodies do not decompose. And so you have to wait a few more years and it becomes a crazy situation. I had never lived through anything like that. And I only knew about it from other people, and I had written about it theoretically. I imagined what it might be like as a scene for one of my characters in my novel, but I had never experienced it in real life. And after 5.5 years, COVID hit, and the municipality was not playing around. They told me I had to show up from Andros and exhume my husband's bones because they needed the space. And while I understand that it was an urgent need for the municipality, one worker kind of threatened me that she told me if I didn't show up for this process, they would do it themselves. And I was furious. But I did make my way to Athens, and I did take part in this situation.
Amalia, do the families, is it a part of the ceremony? Obviously, a funeral and a burial happens after someone dies and everyone's there. Is this part of that ritual, but just a few years later? Like, does the family have to be there? Are prayers said?
The family does not have to be there, but one person has to be there from the family. It doesn't require that everyone is there, but I was lucky. My sister-in-law and my brother-in-law and my nephew accompanied me because I don't think I could have done it alone. And I think we were all shocked in our own silence watching this, unearthing the grave and just seeing a skeleton. It just didn't seem real to me. It did not seem that was my husband.
What was on the shopping list? What did they tell you that you had to bring?
Well, what's required for us to bring is a white bed sheet because they wrap the bones in it. And I had to bring red wine because they wash the bones with that. I had to bring powdered detergent. That's it. Those 3 things.
And do you have to watch?
No, I wanted to be there. I wanted to watch. I had decided I needed to put closure to the physical process of letting him go. And this was part of it in Greece, so I wanted to take part in it. I didn't have to be close by. I could have stood a few feet away, but I was there.
Did you get any advice from other people who had been through it in terms of how to psychologically prepare for something like that or prepare for what you might see?
People told me that sometimes the body has not decomposed, and so it could get very gruesome. But I knew I had to go through this and put the bones in the box that you have to buy from the municipality, and to eventually take him to where he was born, which was in northern Greece, in Thermi, in Thessaloniki. And I wanted to honor his wish. So I went through the whole process, and a few months later, I did take him up there with my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law, and we put him in the same cemetery in the building that I told you, the ossuary, where his parents are and his relatives are, where they're held.
I won't make you recount it, but if I could just read a couple of paragraphs from what you wrote so beautifully, which is an amazing thing to say when you think of the horror that you were faced with, but the way that you were able to describe it. You said, you talked about the grave digger, Eptichios. You say, Eptichios opens your savannah and lays it flat next to your open grave. He asks, do you want to see his skull? Sure, I say, as if someone asked if I want a glass of water. He jumps into the pit on what would have been your chest and bends to lift your skull, a dirty ceremonial bowl lifted in the air toward me. Bone mixed with dirt covers the back part, which is smooth and whole, unlike the broken front, evidence of how violent your fall down the stairs was in our home that night while I slept. Pieces of you come to the surface. Eptichios removes the kneecaps, arm bones, thigh bones, rib cage. There is little of you left, but there is all of you inside me, and there is most of you laid out on the white bed sheet. I can't see the coffin lid or any part of the shiny wooden coffin itself. It has all disintegrated, as has my future. Oh, Amalia. Did writing about this help you process what must have been the most surreal experience of your life?
Yes. I had to tackle this somehow for myself, because often grief can make you feel like you're losing your mind, and no one else around you can really feel what you're feeling, because I'm the one who lost him, and I'm the one who lived with him for so many decades. And that doesn't mean other people don't miss him. They miss him, of course they do. But I needed to write because it's the only way I know how to express myself.
You thought you might be able to take the box back with you, but you couldn't. So what did you ask Eptichios?
I don't know how I thought of it, but I did. I took out a little pouch I had in my bag, and I asked if he could speak with me privately, because I needed some part of my husband with me. I had to leave for Andros again, and I needed to take something with me. So I asked him if he could give me something. I had no idea what he was going to give me. And he gave me a little tiny bone from the pinky, I guess, or from one of the fingers. And he told me to wash it in wine and to dry it. He didn't bat an eyelash. He thought it was totally normal. Maybe people ask for something when they're going through this process. I don't know. But I was very nervous about getting the article published because I did not tell my daughter, I did not tell my sister-in-law or my brother-in-law that what I had done. And I was nervous and afraid that they might get angry at me for taking part of his body with me.
Why would they get angry at you?
I don't know. Maybe they thought it would be proper to keep the person whole. I don't know. I was nervous about it. I didn't share it with anybody.
He said something beautiful to you when he gave you that bone, though, didn't he?
He told me the finger is the strongest bone.
And when you got home, you opened a bottle of wine. And what did you do?
I put the little bone in my husband's wine glass and I poured some red wine for me. And as I usually do, I talked to him out loud and I raised the glass to a great man I was married to, my partner.
You wrote, "Here's to you, my Ruli. Here's to how lucky I have been to love you, to live with you. You were so rare, so kind, so quiet in the coarse flow of life. Here's to my accepting that, at least physically, you are gone. Here's to hoping I can feel again. Here's to hoping I can live again. Cheers." Have you been able to live again?
Actually, I have been lucky. And yes, I feel like I am alive again in many ways. I feel like I'm writing more. I feel like I'm taking part in things that I love, book readings and gallery openings. And I met somebody who I think was brought to me by my husband because I met him through my husband's childhood friends. And he's a wonderful man in his own right. So this is all new.
Tell me about that. Did you think that that part of your life was over?
Yeah, I absolutely thought it was over. I had no expectation about meeting someone who would make me happy or make me smile again. It's very different to socialize and have superficial flings if that's what one wants to do. But I did not think anyone would be able to break through the walls that came up after my husband died. And Steve, his name is Steve, has done that. And we met by email, believe it or not, after my friends kept urging me, please, he's a great guy, get to know him. And I'm like, no. But to make a long story short, we communicated and corresponded for 5 weeks by email. I did not talk to him or see who he was on the computer, but we learned a whole lot about each other by corresponding. And we finally met November 2021 in New York. And I've been going back and forth between Greece and the United States, visiting him until he retires and moves to Greece. And it's been wonderful. It's been a great ride. There are times when I feel I can't believe I'm living this, but I am. I'm lucky.
How, in the space of grief, does room get made for falling in love again and for happiness?
That's $1 million question. I don't think you can plan it. It somehow, through time spent with another person, your heart kind of opens up and it risks. And I go step by step. I sometimes feel like I'm walking in the dark, and other times I feel like, yes, this is wonderful in its own right. It's a back and forth dance. The
two things can coexist, because a lot of people in the depth of grief, whether it's grief from losing a child or a partner, it's not that the hole is filled.
Mm-hmm.
Do the two things just exist concurrently?
they exist together, because there are many times when I do feel, I don't know if I'd call it guilt, but I feel like, why am I allowed to live? Why am I allowed to laugh and feel the sun on my face? And my husband was not that lucky. He worked hard his whole life. He was an incredible man, and his life was cut short. I don't know why. I don't have answers for that. I seek them in books and in music and just spending time alone to think about all this, but I don't really have answers. I don't know.
I just want to say thank you for what you've written, for your beautiful words. I had one more question. I didn't want to interrupt you at the time, but when you said I'd had that feeling before someone died, when had you had it before?
My grandmother's death when I was 5 or 6 really affected me. And my novel's about 3 generations of women, loosely based on my grandmother's life. But I had that feeling when I was very young. After she died, I would feel very uncomfortable and I'd have a heavy feeling in my chest. And I would tell my mother, I don't feel good. Something's not right. Something's not right. And I feel like someone's going to die. And my parents didn't know how to handle me, and I didn't know how to handle me. And sure enough, it would keep happening. And I remember making a conscious effort as a child to push that sense away because it scared me. And I had not thought about it in a long, long time. But I did feel it intensely on January 4th at night, and I did not put 2 and 2 together. Not that I could have stopped something, but I wonder if I had been awake or if I had been aware of what that meant. Maybe, I don't know. I fantasized that maybe I could have held him or stopped him somehow.
It was almost like preemptive grief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm. It's amazing that most people's experience of death is very removed. It's almost a cerebral concept. For you, it's been so visceral, both in his passing and then in his exhuming. Do you feel closer to him when you are on the stairs or when you are holding that bone? Or is it something else that makes you feel close to him?
Well, after he died, I did something really unstable. I went to the spot where I found him, and I was lying down there, and I looked up at the stairs and I found a teeny tiny spot of blood under the lip of the stair. And it really did a number on me. I can't say I feel him remembering the actual event. I feel him in moments. I feel him when I'm on the beach by myself and I'm swimming, or I talk to him when I'm on the beach, and I've done it for a few years. I do feel he's near me at times, and I do feel the new person in my life was brought to me by him because he was my connection. His friends introduced me to Steve, so I think his soul, his spirit may have played a part. I want to believe that. I feel him at the oddest moments, a song or something. I also feel heat near me sometimes, which is really strange, but I feel a change in temperature when I think of him sometimes. I don't know.
Was that Steve before in the background that I saw?
Yes.
He's very handsome.
Yes, he is. And he's a great man.
Amalia, thank you. Sounds like you've had 2 incredible men in your life, and you are indeed an incredible woman as well. So thank you so much. I'm really grateful.
Thank you so much for finding me and for spending time with me.
I can't wait to read your novel. It's going to be a gangbuster.
Thank you.
Wasn't that a beautiful story? I mean, when you say to someone, I'm interviewing a woman who had to dig up her husband's body because that's the custom in Greece, it sounds like it's going to be a horror story, but the way she told it and what she spoke about her life afterwards and before was just so moving to me. I hope you feel the same way. Amalia has written 2 articles in the New York Times and she's currently working on a novel. It's not published yet, but it will be called Where Are All the White Houses? It's about an immigrant's journey based on what her grandmother had told her mother when she arrived in New York as an immigrant from Greece. The executive producer of No Filter is Kimberly Bradish, with sound production by Madeline Joannou. I'm Mia Friedman, and thank you for having me in your ears.